Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unleashed with me, Scarlett Johnson. And today I have a very special guest, my good friend, James Lindsay. James Lindsay is a great friend and he has a brilliant mind. He is one of the sharpest people in the country when it comes to talking about things like woke in education, critical race theory, gender ideology. He has done so much work exposing all of these critical theories that are just destroying American education and many of American institutions. He is a renowned podcaster, a public speaker. He has a huge following on X, and he is the founder of New Discourses. James has written multiple books and articles spanning religion, philosophy, culture, politics. Some of his great books include Cynical Theory, Race. James Lindsay is a great friend, and he is one of the sharpest people in the country when it comes to talking about topics like woke radicalism in education, gender ideology, critical race theory. He has done so much work exposing these critical theories and how they affect American education and how these ideologies are being implemented, the praxis is being implemented in schools. And boy, it has been a long 5 years fighting DEI in education, and woke is certainly not dead, no way. And we are learning so much more about that as we discuss the topic of May Day, and you're going to hear a lot more about that. But back to James. He is a renowned podcaster, a public speaker. He has a huge following on X, and he is the co-founder of New Discourses. James has written multiple books and articles spanning topics like religion, philosophy, culture, politics, including cynical theories, race, Marxism, and the queering of American education. And these are books that have been so helpful to parental rights activists like myself. I can't tell you how many times that I have listened to his podcasts and referenced his books. They are earmarked greatly. Tonight, we are asking a question that should concern every parent in America. Why is the president of the largest public sector union, a teachers union, the NEA, Becky Pringle, why is she showing up in conversations about political revolution, anti-ICE mobilization, and May Day disruption? That's a good question. Why would someone who's to represent hundreds of thousands of teachers across America, why is she engaging in these training videos that are intent on recruiting students? That's a specific quote, recruiting students to political activism, to far left political activism in and outside of the schools. So we're going to watch a video of, just because I always bring the receipts, but first, let's bring on my friend, James. So James, I'm so glad that you could be here today. And I know you're a busy guy, but I really want to talk about this topic because unfortunately, I've had to watch like tens of hours. I think, I don't know, maybe it's up to about 25, 30 hours of these May Day trainings. They kind of branch from the anti-ICE movement that's going on too. So thanks for joining. And right away, I want to play a video, but first, anything you have to say?
No, just thank you for having me. Yeah, May Day is a topic it's funny. We've been talking about communism for years in the US now, and Moms for Liberty in particular. And we don't talk a lot about May Day, which is basically like their biggest holiday, if you could call it that.
It's their Christmas, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Like,
it's very much like their Christmas. That's right.
And I think I was talking with a friend, and she's very knowledgeable about these things too. And she's like, I think a lot of people don't understand that May Day is this total communist holiday. And I think that a lot of people think it's about flowers and celebrating unions and labor workers, but it's got a much longer history than that. But let's watch this video. I mean, the woman that's running it, she's part of the Sunrise organization. There's so many. There are so many organizations every day. There's about 5 more that come into my vocabulary, but she looks literally like insane. She looks like a witch kind of, but here you go. Let's watch it.
Students, if you know students, recruit them. I'm honored to now introduce President Becky Pringle, President of the National Education Association. Look, there's no way that we're going to be able to stop fascism without organized labor. And Becky is the president of our country's largest labor union. Becky and NEA have been deep in partnership with Sunrise and many other organizations, building student and worker organizing power to make this May Day a huge moment in our fight against the billionaire class, against fascism, and for the world that we deserve. I am honored to pass it to you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you, Aru. Aren't our students incredible? Aren't they incredible? They make me proud to say I taught for 31 years, our middle level students in 8th grade. And we know that our young people have always been and always will be at the center of every movement. And I'm so proud of them, just so proud of them. If a society permits one portion of its citizenry to be menaced or to be destroyed, then very soon, no one in that society is safe. Those words by W.E.B. Du Bois remind me that during these dark times when federal agents can snuff out innocent lives on the streets of Minneapolis and claim self-defense, even as multiple videos stand in stark rebuke, when outrageous and illegal and deadly immoral ICE detentions cause the disappearing of children, including 5-year-old Liam Ramos. As we do the work of building a better world, we must also know that this is that time, that we need to keep each other safe. So on behalf of the education professionals who belong to the NEA, the National Education Association, thank you, Sunrise, for standing on the front lines in Minneapolis and in so many cities across our nation, demanding justice in all forms. Know that the NEA will continue to use our vast network, 3 million members, 51 state affiliates, 14,000 locals, members in every congressional district, to advocate and to partner, to take action, to educate, to organize, to mobilize, to litigate, and to elect people who believe in public education and in our Constitution. I am always honored to share a virtual space, virtual or in person, with Representative Khanna, and grateful for all that he is doing to stop ICE violence and overreach, and being steadfastly an ally of educators and our students. So no surprise, NEA is one of this administration's top targets. Dictators always come for educators because we teach the children how to think for themselves, how to question and analyze, to solve wicked problems, and to create community, to appreciate the world's diversity, and to dream and to fight and to make this world a better place. This administration is using ICE to bring fear and trauma into our schools. You heard our students talk about that. It was palpable
Because you lied to them.
Agents are traveling through neighborhoods, wandering
That's not
past past schools and following school buses. They've even assaulted and detained educators and students on school grounds. Educators are seeing this damage every day. Empty seats and a rising need for counseling and mental health supports. In Minneapolis, where families and children are afraid to leave their houses to go to work or take students to the school bus stop, educators are delivering much needed supplies. And across the country, educators are organizing and standing in solidarity with parents to make sure our students have what they need. That sort of collective action is what is required of us now, right now, as we bear witness to the unimaginable. Our government actively engaging in warfare against the American people. I'm talking about the kind of collective action between students and labor leaders and community leaders and working families that drew more than 75,000 people to Minneapolis last week. I'm talking about last year's May Day actions, the largest ever. And I'm talking about the courage and collective action that will bring us together again, May Day strong, standing in our power, continuing the fight against greedy billionaires and all who seek to line their own pockets by destroying the dreams and dignity of those who call this country home. Together, we will demand that this administration stop scapegoating immigrants just so they can implement cruel and callous policies and occupy our communities. Together, we will call for a country where working people can afford to feed their families, where no one is terrorized. For as long as it takes, we will not cooperate. Knowing what research shows, that when 3.5% of the population engages in sustained strategic escalation, those movements win. So we must continue to build our broad coalition to fight against the undemocratic and inhumane. And we also must fight forward. We have to create that vision of an inclusive and just society that protects our communities, respects our Constitution. We, the people, all of us, deserve that right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I need you all to stay strong and remember that solidarity, it's a verb.
Boy, there is a lot to unpack there. That's just a sample. This is actually one of the more tamer interviews. Before her, they had several high school students and middle school students talk about, they were white and they were from affluent areas. And they were talking about how they're so afraid to go to school. And I mean, these kids, I would research the schools that they would talk about and the incidents, and they're non-existent. This isn't happening, what she's talking about, this fear that they're, especially in suburban, white, affluent areas, you have kids giving speeches about things that they've heard about on the news, and they're almost imagining that it could happen in their school, but the only Hispanic people that they know in their community work as nannies or as maids. And this is a fact because I have seen these protests, these anti-protests all around my community. And I'm looking at, I know these areas and I'm like, you kids, you are a 98% white community. Why are you out there protesting, thinking that any day ICE is going to raid your middle school or high school? It's not real, but they are using kids as political pawns. And that's what's very upsetting to me. But I'm gonna stop talking. I want to get your take on all of that.
Well, I mean, what we could actually have done is gone through about 8 seconds of that at a time and talked for like 10 minutes per segment. That was on the one hand, it was really loaded with stuff to talk about. On the other hand, I understand how the Greek epics got written, because I think I fell asleep and had one of those dreams where you go to the underworld and come back and have an entire epic poem, 900 pages long, written about your journey while you were asleep. And so that was shock. It's really hard to pay attention to because it's so slow. It's supposed to be passionate, but it was just so methodical in bringing up like key terms, like buzzwords that are going to activate people. So first of all, let's just point out that the Sunrise Movement is a climate justice organization. So it has absolutely nothing to do with ICE whatsoever, except that we have to understand that these organizations all work together. They all do the same thing, and that the issue that they claim to be about is not the issue. The issue is the revolution against the United States. And I think what you just focused on is the most worthy part to comment on, except where she said the 3.5% who engage in strategic escalation. So this is good. Their goal is to make it more and more and more intense, more and more crazy until something breaks. And that's what they did in Minnesota, which of course she's invoking repeatedly. But what you brought up, I think, is the key thing to talk about, a lot of other details aside, which is that what they do is manage perception. So they are speaking in a way that doesn't actually say almost anything. There was virtually no details given. They alleged that there's some videos out there that showed that, ICE went after innocent people. We all know that's not what actually happened. And even if it were the case, that's what we have courts to deal with. And so we know this isn't the case. But what they do is they tell people what they're supposed to see in the video and then show people the video. And it's like the Jedi mind trick, because that's what they see after the fact. And so the game is to manage perception. And the reason is because the woke mindset overall is predicated off of the idea that perception creates reality. And this is a very hard thing. People are like, I can't understand how they think this way. Are these people just crazy? Am I crazy? They don't know what they're doing because they can't get their head. And I've actually talked to very smart people who literally have told me that they have a line. They just can't go any further understanding woke because they can't get in their head the idea that there are actually people who believe that perception creates reality. They can't see the world that way. They think that reality is real. Reality is out there. Reality is something we encounter, that we can talk about, that we can study, that we can experience. But it's not that it's something we create. And so the woke mindset, what it means to be woke, this is called critical constructivism, is that perception creates reality and power creates perception. That's the constructivist part, is that perception creates reality, and the critical part is that power creates perception. So the goal is to tell people that there's a hidden power dynamic in whatever they're seeing, and that hidden power dynamic tells you the real story of what's really happening, and to convince people to be able to see that and perceive it, because the goal is to create, if perception precedes reality or perception creates reality, if that were actually true, that's how they believe the world works. If that were actually true, then the only way you could agree upon reality is if you agreed upon perception, which therefore means everybody has to see stuff the same way, which is consensus, which means you have to convince everybody that what they're seeing is the way that it's being explained by these woke people. So all of that very desperately non-passionate, sleepy, and horrifying talk was built around this idea of creating this perception. The perception is that there are systems of power dynamics, systems of power and power dynamics out there that are oppressing people, that are preventing, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of us, as if they're interested in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They're interested in sort of life, if you agree, and liberty if you are saying what they say, in the pursuit of woke, not the pursuit of happiness. And so, which makes them happy because they're in charge. But they say, oh, well, we need to get it for all Americans. Like, it's like we don't have that already. Like, what rights do these people not have? They're just full of it, right? And so they have the same rights as literally everybody else. Everybody has to go through stuff, some good, some bad in life. This is just creating this perception of victimhood, creating this perception that some people are being cheated. And as you pointed out in the part that we didn't watch with this, she referenced these high school students. that are coming from, as you said, largely affluent, mostly white areas, nice schools, that are being told these things, or they're seeing the clips on the news and being told how to see them. And then they're perceiving that that is how their school might work too, or must work. And then they're going and being histrionic about it in front of their school, and they're being rewarded as being brave. That's what she's talking about also, Becky Pringle. We have educators out there organizing. It's like, what are you actually doing? It's not teaching kids to read. It's not teaching kids mathematics. You're organizing. And so it's all very strange, or it would be if we didn't understand that what we're watching is a farce. And that's the bottom line. What we're watching is a farce. This is people pretending to be talking about education when what they're talking about is communist revolution. Bottom line, nothing else.
And they're pretending that they are not paid activists, that this is all grassroots, that this is all bottom up. I actually looked, I won't say names, but I looked, some of the student activists, their parents were activists themselves. And so, of course, so their children are more activists, and then they put their children on camera, and it seems also natural, also grassroots. My 14-year-old just, she's the one who's teaching me, but that's not true. She's got one or two very, very radical activist parents. They're radical in the climate change movement or whatever. And they're just cheering on their child that's engaging in this similar radicalism. But I wanted to say, I really liked what you said about perception, because is that why when it comes to, let's say, because right now we're dealing with that topic in Wisconsin, boys and girls bathrooms, why they simply cannot tolerate the fact that there may be girls that do not want a boy in their bathroom, that they cannot see that boy as a girl. And there's parents that just simply can't do that. And it enrages them. They just, like, you must see what we see. That boy, that obvious boy, is a girl if he says so, and you have to believe with me. They are the ones, we're sort of like, live and let live. Think whatever you want, just don't make me participate in it. Don't make me go to the bathroom. Don't make me play against a boy. I don't want my daughter to play against a boy. But if your kid wants to go around saying that your boy wants to say that they're a girl, fine. I'm just not going to be forced to participate in it. They can't handle that. And it just drives them literally insane. I watch it every day when they come up against very reasonable, practical people. We had a school board member, Mary Stevie, who was once a far left feminist, and everything that she had witnessed, she's from Minnesota, over the last 7 years has sort of changed her, red pilled her. And she's a biologist and a very reasonable, tolerant woman. But just because she refuses to say that a boy can become a girl, they just turned on her. They absolutely, you cannot be part of our tribe anymore. So is that part of that? Like, you have to see what we see, or you aren't one of us, and you have to be retrained.
Yeah, that's how their worldview works. That's why there's the re-education and the retraining in the first place. What Mao called ideological remolding is actually the phrase for it. And he actually talks about how especially the educated people, the scholars, and the when he uses the words intellectuals, it's basically anybody with the equivalent of like a high school diploma or associate's degree. And so he says the intellectuals must constantly be engaging in their ideological remolding. And again, let's just go back to the very foundation that I laid out about the worldview. The woke worldview is two pieces: critical and constructivist. The constructivist piece, those are the fancy words, you don't need to know those. The constructivist piece means perception precedes reality, and the critical part means power shapes perception. So we'll leave the critical aside for the moment. We'll just talk about the perception creates reality. If you believe that, the way that you decide that something is actually true, that it can be true in the sense that something's actually true, like it's true for everybody, is when everybody agrees on it. So the person who doesn't agree to the proposition that the, say, boy dressed as a girl going into the girl's bathroom is actually a girl, somebody who doesn't agree to that proposition is preventing that from being true. So therefore is denying the claim of the person making it, and is therefore denying the reality that person believes is reality. And therefore, by denying their reality, notice how all this language you've heard from them that's weird, it all starts to
Yes.
fall out from this one perspective. Their reality is being denied, therefore their existence is being denied.
Oh,
And so it all falls down, and that is dehumanizing. That is the worst thing you could possibly imagine. That's tremendously hurtful. Whatever the phrasing, it's very harmful. It's unsafe for that person who's trying to be affirmed in all things all the time and has psychological disorders if they're not, and might act on them. Who knows? Those statistics are overblown, but they're not zero. And so anybody who doesn't participate threatens to blow the whole thing. And here's the reality of it. I mean, actually, one of the postmodernists, one of the famous postmodern theorists, not that we're fans of these guys, Jean-Francois Lyotard, who wrote the book called The Postmodern Condition in 1979. Jean-Francois Lyotard, in that book, talks about something called legitimation by parology. That's a fancy set of words, but what it means is you believe that reality, so that's the legitimizing part, you legitimate what you think is true or not, based on something he calls parology. That's paralogy, beside logic. In other words, it's fake, it's false, it's not real. And so he says that what it boils down to is belief by consensus. You believe in things that are not true about reality because it's the story everybody believes about reality. That's legitimation by parology. And so what they're actually doing is, even though Jean-Francois Lyotard was criticizing that, he was saying that's what the sciences do, is that they force people to all believe in the same worldview. But what they've done is that they've turned that inside out. The constructivist view has turned that inside out by using it to criticize reality in the real world. They've turned it inside out, and they believe that that's how it works. You have to understand the world the way they understand it, or else you're denying reality, and you become the avatar. You become the invitation not to accept their fake world. So they're projecting a fake world. It's like we all went to the movies or whatever, or we're in a play and we're all participating in this show. And then there's the one kid who just won't do it right. He won't act. He acts like, Joey instead of whoever he's supposed to be. He's not, he imagines like a Roman scene or whatever, and it's the play at that they all put together for the year at the end, and he's supposed to be Augustus Gladius or whatever, and he's just Joey standing there in like skateboarder clothes saying like what or what. He's just not doing it. It breaks the illusion. Then this is actually the truth. They think that all the world's a stage is actually kind of literal, and that there's this illusion called truth, and that it's constructed socially by people agreeing upon what they believe is true. So when you have somebody who says that's not true, and I'm not participating in that because it's not true, and you can't force my participation because I see the world differently, that bursts the bubble. The performance is exposed. It's like breaking the fourth wall on stage. Immediately you're taken out of the scenario, you're out of the scene. But they think that this is the consequence of that constructivist worldview, is that you think all approaches to the world are that. All approaches are constructed. Theirs is constructed, but it's constructed in service to things they think are good. Yours is constructed. The thing you call reality is also just a fake construction. That's what Lyotard's point was. However, you don't know that yours is fake, but they know yours is fake. So what you're trying to do is assert through your appeal to power, straight, white, male, scientific, Eurocentric, America-centric, whatever, stupid buzzword, you're asserting a power dynamic to deny their existence. And so therefore you're very bad, and therefore you have to be punished. And the people who will punish you to ideologically remold you, to get you to see the world, that's actually what it was in Mao's China too. The point of ideological remolding was literally given as to teach people to see the world from the people's perspective, meaning the communist people's perspective. So you're supposed to see the world from the lens of the oppressed. And if you don't see through their lens, you are an invitation into reasserting the power dynamic that's keeping them from being free in the imaginary world. That's Becky Pringle was talking about that. We have to create the vision, she said, for a world without oppression. Well, that's if you're like, I'm not going to the bathroom with a dude. I'm just not doing it. And you can't make me participate in it. And I'm not going to call him or her. I'm just not going to do it. Then you've popped the bubble on the performance and you've ruined their vision. Therefore, you're the enemy. And because they operate according to the model of politics called the friend-enemy distinction, the way it works is that the authorities that are deemed legitimate declare the enemy. Everybody is therefore to fight the enemy and destroy the enemy. And anybody who does not fight and destroy the enemy is part of the enemy. And that's the cancel culture, purge culture that you see that they do. So this is all very consistent and logical in terms of how they think. It's just evil.
So, I want to get back to May Day, but I do want to make this point that there was a recorded conversation where a 15-year-old girl was talking to school administrators and complaining that she encountered a boy in her bathroom. And so she and her friend went to talk to the administrators, and they were smart. These girls are smart. They recorded the conversation just to be sure. And so I got to hear it, and you'd hear the administrators and they're like, well, I know, like, it's just, we would get sued. And even though that's not true, they would not get sued, especially under the Trump administration. As a matter of fact, they're getting sued because of their policy, because it violates Title IX. Mm-hmm. And, we just want to be nice. We just want to be inclusive, and so we're just following the science and all of that. And don't you want to be nice, and don't you want to just show that you're a good person? And so the girl said, well, I think it kind of sucks that I'm the one that has to be uncomfortable, and that, like, there's 300 girls in the school and we all have to be uncomfortable because one guy wants to use my bathroom. Why can't he just use the single stall bathroom? And they're just like, well, that's just not going to happen. And you should, we just want to be kind. So you basically suck it up because this boy thinks he's a girl and you need to be kind. And that is, again, that's about just what you said. There's the illusion. You cannot break the mold. You cannot say the emperor has no clothes. You have to be the one to suffer, probably because you are a cis white female. So you are lower on their oppression scale. And in the oppression Olympics, the most oppressed wins. So, I mean, what do you make of a conversation like that happens every day, probably hundreds of times a day in America right now?
Yeah, well, those girls are smart and those administrators are terrible. They're completely either captured or they're actively complicit in doing this. But this is, like I said, this is where you get back to that idea that it's very easy to understand a lot of these if we kind of go back in time to something we know is what it is, like Mao's China. The idea is to get the people to see from the people's perspective. So in this case, it's to get these girls to see the world from the perspective of the trans person or trans identifying boy. And to get them to see it, they have to be appealed to. You have to be nice. You have to be kind. You have to, whatever these values are, you have to care about these people's feelings. And the reason actually is because, again, we're in a critical constructivist view. So perception creates reality and power creates perception. The thing is that only the people who suffer in this philosophy, only the people who suffer oppression actually can see oppression. And they can guide other people or point to it for other people, but if you have a privileged positionality, as it's called, you can't see it. So the more oppressed a person, as you said in the oppression Olympics, the more oppressed, the more wise, knowledgeable, and clear-eyed they are. They have a perspective necessary for people to see this vision of the world without oppression, because they're the ones suffering oppression. This actually goes back not just to the Maoists, but all the way to Karl Marx, where he actually says that suffering itself is the criterion of consciousness. It is the thing that causes you to awaken, is suffering. That's why he wrote the Opium of the Masses piece in 1843. He wrote right in there that the point is that religion causes people to channel and cover up their suffering in the real world. But the point is to make them feel their suffering so they won't tolerate the intolerable world that they live in. So you're going to peel away. You start with the criticism of religion, he says, because you peel away that opiate that makes them able to bear suffering. And he says you're going to strip that away from them so that they can see reality as it is and act in reality as it is. And reality is unjust suffering, because he operates in what's called conflict theory, or a class conflict model of how reality is structured. And so what's happening is these girls are objecting to this on very reasonable grounds. And these administrators are playing the role effectively of an educator or a prison guard or a red guard in Mao's China, or in any Marxist revolution, trying to get them to understand that they don't see the crimes that they're committing, the harms that they're perpetuating, and that they have to appeal to their feelings and to the lived oppression claimed by the trans identifying boy. Now the thing is, this is a little bit complicated, because it is true that somebody who's suffering an injustice is likely to be aware of it, right? They're likely to notice that they're suffering an injustice. And it might be the case that other people are not quite as aware of it because they aren't. So there's this kernel of truth. But the problem is not only that there are two main problems. One is that this is all interpreted through the Marxist framework of that critical theory, or in other words, the oppressor versus oppressed dynamic, where more oppression gives more sight. And the other problem is that, how do you stop a psychopath or a grifter from taking advantage of it? If they're in some kind of a position, as it's called, a social position, that's considered marginalized, all they can do, they always have available to them. Let me phrase it that way. Always available to them is to say, I'm not satisfied, I'm still oppressed, whether it's microaggressions instead of like real racism, whether it's perceiving, like with the microaggression story, a lot of people haven't heard this. Mari Matsuda is the person who did not create microaggressions, but popularized microaggressions. Actually, it was a CIA affiliated psychologist that worked in the MK Ultra program that invented microaggressions in 1970. But I digress. Mari Matsuda is the one who wrote the book about this thing first. I might have Matsuda wrong. It might be somebody else. It's been a minute since I've read my CRT. But at any rate, what it is it's not Matsuda. It's a different person. But we have this racial minority who's on an airplane and is told to move because the weight is not balanced on the aircraft. And because I think it's a guy is a racial minority, he concludes it must be racism that led, and that this is somehow a microaggression, and he experiences thousands of microaggressions all the time. And so it's like, and it's not Mari Matsuda. I apologize. I'll have to look up who it is. I apologize.
Shelby Steele once said they can feel the pee of oppression under 1,000 mattresses. Like
that's right. Yeah. And, well, the thing is that they're rewarded for finding it. Right. Once you create this dynamic where you gain status and power for being able to find the problem, and you don't know, Becky Pringle, here we are, how many years into this project are we? And they're still like trying to create the vision. They don't have a vision. They don't know what it looks like. So what it is that everybody who can find some new thing to complain about gets status, they get jobs, they get opportunities. If you find a new effective way to complain about racism or transphobia or something that nobody thought of before, you're going to be able to get trotted out on all of these little stupid programs, and you're going to be able to affect change. So you get a reward for figuring out a way that, like, to be very Wisconsin about it, that a rock on a college campus is racist. Yes. If you can figure out how the rock is racist and cause a big stink and cause them to move the rock, then you've made like a huge stink. That's power. Imagine you're 18 years old and you go whine to an administrator and they're spending $60,000 to move an ancient, rock off of the campus. Yeah. Massive disruption. All these people are upset. And then you get to be like even more of a victim because people are mad at you. It's like, it's intoxicating, right? Negative attention.
The more anger. As a matter of fact, the school board before, the Trump administration announced, we're talking about New Richmond, Wisconsin, before the Trump administration announced a Title IX investigation, and before the girls and the parents came forward and they elected a new school board member who won overwhelmingly and kicked out the board president, the woke guy from Minnesota. And before just last week, another lawsuit, a private action lawsuit, was filed against the parents. They were trying to sell this story to the community, and they went so far to say that they were going to hire an architect and spend millions of dollars, millions, probably tens of millions of dollars, creating single stall bathrooms, all because one boy in a high school says that he's a girl. There might be some in middle school, that it's more prevalent with some of the younger kids, and it's a kind of multiplying, but they were willing to do all of that. Instead, they could have just simply, and that's what parents were, they couldn't understand. Why can't you just not have this policy and put this boy in one of the single stall bathrooms and let all the girls alone? And what about the fact that they can't? So you talk that all they can do is feel the oppression. Why can't they sympathize with the girls who are crying and who feel violated, and they just don't want a man, and for good reason, because they fear for their safety, they fear assault. They don't want a man in their bathroom or in their changing room, or they're like Riley Gaines and they don't want to compete against a man who has an unfair advantage. Why can't these women in particular, these woke women, why can't they empathize with the girls?
Because they've been broken. They've been buck broken by the ideological remolding program already, or they have a corrupt motivation, which I wanted to kind of break in and talk about. So I'll try to remember to get to it. But they, if they see from what the Maoists called the people's perspective, these white girls, or they don't have to be white, these girls who are crying and upset and afraid and every other thing are believed to be blind to what to the harm that they're causing, and thus self-centered. And so the whole point is to teach them to see the world from the perspective of the oppressed person. And the administrator, if they're an honest broker, has already been broken by this emotional assault. They've already been through the critical struggle, as it's called, Pipan Dojang in the original Chinese. They've already been broken by this and turned into somebody who sees the world in this upside down way, this oppression-oriented vision of the world. So they are already part of the cult. And so these girls, however, are not, and they might be afraid. They might be afraid. I mean, Robin DiAngelo has an entire chapter in White Fragility. I think it's chapter 11, if I remember right, called White Women's Tears, talking about how when you call a white woman a racist and she starts crying and gets upset, that's actually her acting out in a form of white fragility from her privilege, because she doesn't want to confront her racism. She doesn't want to deal with the people's perspective. She wants to stay in her own perspective. And again, if perspective creates reality, these girls are in a different perspective. And if power creates perspective, they're reasserting their power through that act of being upset or crying or whatever. And so it's a very bad situation. That's why if they're honest, that's why they can't see. They've already been buck broken by the situation, by the critical struggle they've already been put through themselves. So they went through it first. They were victimized by this ideology and its exponents, and now they're victimizing these girls. It's a cycle of abuse, kind of like, exactly. And by the way, I looked it up. It's Chester Pierce is the CIA agent who created microaggressions, and Daryl Wing Sue is the name of the critical race theorist that popularized them. But okay, there's also the non-honest type. Okay, so what you just described explains something dark and sinister that feels very Democrat, just to be very blunt about it. The way the Democrats have operated in our country for many, many years now is with a lot of crooked contracts. So you have officials, people maybe like Becky Pringle, who promise Democrats lots of votes if they vote for stuff that they get to implement. So we want to put all these millions of dollars into these programs that pay off all of our friends, blah, blah, blah. We'll get the entire teachers union to vote for you if you give us the, $2 billion contract, which we're going to use to hire our friends in very inefficient ways to fulfill. This is what I've been told in several of the bluer states, especially California. This is literally how a state operates. All of these unions, especially the public sector unions, just have a revolving money door where the politician approves the policy and it goes to the union reps, have their friends and their different NGOs and their different organizations that they make sure fulfill all the contracts that all get rich. And in return, they say, we're getting rich, so we're going to vote for the Democrats that keep approving the stuff that we want. And it's the most unbelievable corruption. So you start talking about single stall bathrooms, and it's going to cost millions of dollars. And we all think if we're normal people, we don't want to spend millions of dollars for these bathrooms, right? Well, guess who does want to spend millions of dollars for bathrooms? people who make millions of dollars installing bathrooms. That's who wants to. So if there's some contractor that's now networked with the teachers union or the administration or whatever, and they can leverage for this kind of policy, now that kid, that one kid that's trans identifying, all of a sudden becomes their gateway to millions of dollars in contracts. And so satisfying that kid means they get rich, and telling that kid, suck it up, buttercup, you're 1 out of 300 and you can do what you do with what's already there, does not get them millions of dollars in contracts. So the corruption element is there. This is why I call it the iron law of woke corruption. And while I say the iron law of woke projection never misses, I say the iron law of woke corruption is real. It is very real. This is often the motivation, is that there's a network of union affiliated NGOs or organization affiliated NGOs that will receive the contracts. And so if the school plays along, they get a river of money coming in, and their friends get the contracts, and the politicians get votes in return for giving them sweetheart contract deals over and over and over and over again with state taxpayer money. The whole thing is run on giant taxpayer funded grift. And this is the piece that a lot of people, like that one kid causing the bellyache and crying about oppression. You could have 0 buck broken administrators who know that millions of dollars are going to pour into the school, and thus into them, their own and their friends' pockets possibly, or allow them to complete the ambitions that they have, even if it's not personal gain within the school, if they coddle this kid and rearrange all policy around one of these people. This is particularly bad with all these mental health diagnoses that then bring in all kinds of other kinds of federal funding into the school. If you can diagnose half of your kids with autism and that they're all special needs now, the school gets a river of special needs money coming from the federal and state government. And so there's a massive motivation for them to figure out ways to diagnose students. So you get the medicalization of the school because it's a giant money wheel.
So I think, and there you can tie in some of what's this May Day Strong, rooted out of the anti-ICE walkouts that they've been doing in the schools all January, February, March. And they'll have the imaginary, like if they are a white affluent school, they are sympathizing with the kids that they perceive are being just dragged out of the school by ICE every day in, this nearest city for me, Milwaukee, it could be Detroit, it could be Chicago, Los Angeles. So their perception is that this is happening. And so I'm a good person and I'm going to stand up for it. And then the teachers, of course, we've been posting on Moms for Liberty almost daily that there's toolkits given out by teachers, that there's emails that go out to say, if you're interested in participating during school hours, come to room such and such, or there's flyers littered everywhere. Hey, if you would like to join and stand up in these anti-ICE protests, come to this room and make signs. And so all these kids are like, oh, this is fun. And I'm a good person and I'm standing up and fighting for something that is indeed that isn't happening. And so I think, in the case I talked about, there's 1 or 2 or 3 these boys that are obvious boys pretending to be girls, and they're gaming the system so that they can go into the bathrooms and shower rooms and watch girls change. This is frankly what's happening a lot. And but the teacher's going to stand up for them. The same thing. The anti-ICE is like you're standing up for this cause. And you're engaging in all of this activism, and the teachers unions get to activate these kids. And guess what else they're doing, James? They're registering them to vote. Are you 18? Well, the League of Women Voters is part of May Day, and so they're registering the kids to vote. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that a nice way to deliver? And who's leading these walkouts? Democrats in state elected office. So they're out there blowing the horn. They're with underage children leading these walkouts. I have watched it happen in my own community and in communities across the country. So it's the socialist Democrats. I'm looking up so many different, there's just so Indivisible. That's a big one. They're holding lots of training, Indivisible forms Facebook groups, these anti-Moms for Liberty Facebook groups. They have thousands of them, and they're part of this whole thing in the training. And their goal on May 1st is to what they call, and I'm hoping you can explain this better to me, a structure test. They keep using this word. This is a structure test. I've heard it now 10 times. And I'm like, what do they mean by that? So looking it up, it said whether a movement can actually turn its supporters into coordinated action. But that verbiage keeps coming up, and I'm like, this seems important. What is a structure test? How does this relate to May Day? And that one of their goals is something that pertains to Moms for Liberty is they want to shut down the schools and daycares. They are saying we want to shut down daycares, schools. No childcare, no options for parents. Parents are forced to stay home. They also want nurses. They have several associations of nurses that are going to call in sick to hospitals and clinics. I hope people are grasping this. They want grocery stores to shut down. They want restaurants to close.
Yeah.
They say, hey, be original. If you can't think of something, just think of a local business. Take down the billionaires. I'm like, what local business are billionaires? The local owner of the grocery store down the street, they're not a billionaire. They're a small business owner, but you're going to shut them down. So I'll be quiet now because that's a lot. But this,
yeah, well, this actually, believe it or not, all makes sense. So the structure test, this is a new term to me, but it's not hard to put together what they're talking about. It's like in the movie, I know this is a dated example, but it's like in the movie Jurassic Park, where the velociraptors are in the pen and they're sticking their faces on the electric fence to find the weak spot so they can get out. What they're actually trying to do is figure out what kind of action they can take that will cause the system to break. So what the system has a structure. Imagine it like our society is a building, and what they're looking for is some kind of action that hits a weak point that causes it to collapse. So they want some sector of our economy or some sector of our society to collapse. This is what they were doing in Minneapolis too. They just didn't, and to my knowledge, they didn't use the word structure test. They were going out and confronting ICE in various ways to see where ICE would be forced to do something physical or kinetic with them that they could then they could use it as to make a media cause that they would be able to use to affect the entire program. And they successfully did. I mean, for other reasons as well. It's good that Kristi Noem got removed from her office, but she got removed from her office. Trump had to back down quite a bit after, first reply escalating, and then he had to end up backing down. So they showed that by basically getting in ICE's face sufficiently in certain types of operations that they do, that they could paint ICE as the bad guys, paint the federal government as fascist, and cause the program that's being run, which is under the Department of Homeland Security, to basically fail. So this is the same thing. But with May Day, it's interesting that what they're doing is in amounts to a general strike. They want to shut down the schools. They want to shut down the daycares, to force the parents to not go to work, to stay home and not go to work that day. They want nurses, they want everything, so that, like you said, everything shuts down. And that actually, May Day is largely symbolic here. It's like you said, or like we said earlier, it's like the Christmas for communists. But its actual origin point was a general strike. So May Day started to be a holiday. It doesn't go way, way, way back. I mean, of course, communism only goes back to like the 1840s anyway, in any meaningful sense. You could argue that there were earlier attempts at communism during the French Revolution. There was even one, for example, 60 years earlier or 50 years earlier or whatever. But it's really not until it's really not until 1917 when the Russians took over, or the Soviets took over Russia, that you really have communism anywhere. But through the 1880s, what you had happen in Chicago was what's called the Haymarket Affair. This is 1886 or thereabouts, plus or minus 3, I don't know. Second half of the 1880s, you have the Haymarket Affair, which was a big strike. They wanted 8-hour work days. They went on this huge strike. Somehow within a few days, something went sideways. You ended up having a guy, I forget, he detonated a bomb. The cops started shooting. People on both sides of the cops and the protesters strikers ended up dying. This turned into, of course, a calamity. But guess what day the Haymarket Affair strike started? May 1st. And so what happened was, a couple of years later, at the first Congress of the Second International, which is a little bit complicated, the communist the communists have run what's called the International Working Man's Party. There was a first international, then it got reinvented as the Second International in the late 1880s. It was explicitly communist by the Second International. And then what Moscow ran after the Soviet Union was established was called the Third International. So it is this continuity. It's becoming more communist over time, but it's a very working man's socialist organization. So the first Congress, the first meeting of, international meeting of the Second International, named May 1st as a Labor Day holiday that recognizes this international solidarity of the working class against their exploiters. And it became officially recognized, therefore, as the kind of communist foundational holiday. When later President Grover Cleveland named the first Monday in September to be Labor Day, which we have in Canada and the United States, that I think it's called bourgeois Labor Day, because they're not wrong. These guys, the communists, are not wrong. Grover Cleveland intentionally put it on the first Monday in September to make it not be on May 1st and not at all close to May 1st on the calendar, so that you could distinguish the American labor movement from the communist labor movement, which is not the same thing. But it started with a strike. And so the goal is to create a strike that causes a system to basically blow out. That's what happened with the Haymarket Affair and the original May Day. The original May 1st May Day was a general strike in Chicago that ended up spiraling into violence within a few days, that caused an entire system to have to be rethought about how things happened. And that's what they're talking about with a structure test. They want to see if they can create conditions under which the normal working order of society collapses, forcing there to be some different model to be put into place. So that's the radical rejection of capitalism holiday. And fascists and communists agree, or had agreed at least, upon that idea. So that's what the celebration is. But the point is to recreate the conditions that sort of emulate what happened in the Haymarket Affair when the whole thing started, in order to do, like it's called, a structure test or a system test. The other thing, though, that when you said the definition of the structure test is, this is the other thing they do with this, is the left is actually really smart with this, smarter than we are. One of the things that they do with any kind of direct action like this is that it is simultaneously whatever it is, the actual action, and simultaneously a recruitment training program. So the goal is to find out, they'll send all these kids out, or teenagers or whatever, or maybe it's even just street activists, whatever it happens, moms that pour out. And the goal is to find out who naturally demonstrates leadership. And then they give those people jobs in NGOs. They put those people into positions of leadership. They become the community organizers. So the part of the goal, like on these campus protests that they have all the time, is to find out which students are the ones that are going to grab the bullhorn and say the stuff that gets everybody going, or they're going to be the one that thinks up, to dig a trench to pee in around their tents or whatever it is. And those people are going to get promoted to actual activist jobs that are often funded. And so it's a recruitment and training circumstance for them as well. And that verbiage you read actually reflects that they're going to be looking for that. So whoever takes positions or actions of leadership potential will also be identified and brought under their wing to be groomed into more effective community organizers and activists.
And so, in another phrase, student and worker organizing power. One activist educator. I'm most of the speakers, I would say, about, if there are 6 speakers, at least 4 of them are administrators, former teachers, current teachers. It very much, this is in the space, as they say, of education. And if they aren't that, they work in political campaigns, or they've been lifelong union organizers. This is a top-down movement made to look as if it's grassroots.
Yeah, the Maoists called that planned spontaneity, by the way. So the Communist Party under Mao would plan demonstrations, organize them, make sure they were funded, make sure they're organized, but also make sure that when they happened, they looked like a grassroots, spontaneous outpouring of the people. And, I don't know how the percentages would break down in Mao's China, but the percentages probably break down that you have a fairly large body of paid activists, and then you have probably 3-to-1, so 25% activists, 75% followers along, who get kind of swept up in, oh, stuff's happening, I'll go. And but the point is to make it look like, and especially with the kids, they want to make it look like even school children are pouring out of their classrooms, sacrificing their education and their learning time because this is so important. But really, it was all organized by activists inside the school to get them to do this. And then they pretend that it was, grassroots and very organic. You see this with all of their massive protests. They're out there all of a sudden, and within like 15 minutes, everybody has the same sign, which is professionally printed. And if you read the fine print on the sign, it's usually by some socialist workers' party nearby.
Yeah. Well, the NEA, the AFT, they have specific marching orders. I've seen, this is also consistent, that you are to, they have a toolkit, call in sick, put the pressure on, and then work through the unions. Like in Chicago, there's actually something interesting happening because the mayor is all for this. Give them a civics day off. The unions are for it, but the president of the Chicago, some Chicago education, she is refusing to acquiesce and give this day off. So there's kind of back and forth. I've been watching the news where some are saying, yes, go ahead, take the day off. And then others are saying, no, you're going to have to go to work. So we'll see what happens there. But there is this campaign to get teachers, and they need to, and I can't even imagine the pressure that they are applying in public schools to teachers, because if enough teachers do not call in sick, this whole thing doesn't happen and it's a dud. So they need to put pressure on the teachers. I would imagine that there are many administrators and teachers that don't want to do this, but they don't want to stand out, and they are keeping tabs. These people are keeping tabs about who has, when you're on the recordings, the Zooms, they are looking like, did you text, to solidarity to this number? Did you call in to your employer sick? Have you organized a May Day protest? Have you started a chapter of Indivisible or whatever organization? So there's this constant pressure. They are selling a product, and that product is very much political in nature, and they are using teachers and students and kids to achieve this end. And I know the optics that they're looking for. And I'm not doing this podcast just so that we can talk about how terrible these people are. It's the call to action to parents that if you have kids in K through 12 public schools or private schools, whatever, you need to call the school and let them know that you expect there to be school on May 1st, on Friday, May 1st. And that if for some reason there are kids walking out, that your child does not have permission to leave the premises, and you will hold the school accountable if their child leaves without their consent. I would be proactive. Don't wait. Get ahead of this. Say, my kid is not allowed to leave the premises I do not give my permission. And be proactive, because it would be a feather in their cap if they could get, especially in red counties, red states, they're really trying for that. If they could get a bunch of kids to do what they did in January and February, most of whom, I was out to some of these things talking to kids. I'm telling you, 75% were just laughing and giggling and had no idea what they were doing. They just wanted to walk out of school. But there was the 25% that were very dedicated, and they were mostly girls. This is, again, mostly females, mostly girls that are walking out. They are the leaders. They are the organizers. They're really doing a number on girls in America. It's really sad.
Yeah, I will point out, it's very important for people to understand that this is actually, as aggressive as this is, I agree with you completely about being proactive too, but as aggressive as this is, that this is actually their defensive posture, right? So since President Trump got elected, a lot of people don't know, but you can see this in the woke research literature. When President Reagan got elected in 1980, they went full Chicken Little. The sky is falling. Woe is me. What are we going to do? And what they did was they went into the locations in society that they had entrenchment, which at the time was basically certain sectors of academia and nothing else. They went into the places where they had a little bit of sway in some of the states, but they went into the places where they had entrenchment, and they just went all out in those areas. So right now, education is one of the few places where they actually have true dominance. So they are manipulating that situation, but they're also trying to keep that energy alive. So by getting proactive and throwing another loss in front of them, it's not going to stop the activists. The activists never stop. They're like Terminator. But at the same time, it diffuses the power of what they're trying to do, especially if it's something just as peaceful as we totally expect school to stay open and my children are not permitted to engage in, off-campus activities. I refused my permission. So I think this is really important to understand. I'm not saying that they're weak, because they're not. And it's not to say that we've won, because we haven't. Or it's not to say even that we're winning, because we are not yet. But what is true is that they are in a defensive posture because they don't hold the levers of power that they held during the Biden administration, or even during the first Trump administration, before there was any kind of a real concrete plan about what to do about this. So now we're in this different situation. They're in a defensive position, and the goal is, when they're on defense, is to keep pushing them backwards. So this is exactly when it's time to get engaged. These actions you've recommended, Scarlett, are perfect. It doesn't take that many parents to call and make those kinds of expectations to make the school realize that there's going to be a problem on their hands if they decide to shut the school or whatever else. And it can make a difference. We want their little stunts to be foiled, especially while we have the opportunity. And we want their structure test, by the way, to fail. We want them to go test the structure, and that the structure knocks them down. And guess what? You can't break our system. Our system is stronger than you. Go away. That's the vibe you want.
The other entrenched, there's Minnesota, Minneapolis. The areas in which they are targeting are going to be like deep blue areas where they can mobilize better, and they're going to highlight that. But another question I have is, let's say they do shut down several big school districts, and it's all over the television, and frustrated parents don't know where their kids are, and they can't go to work, and daycares are shut down. Oh, nurses aren't showing up. And what happens? One of these kids just trips and falls, breaks their arm, or there's an elderly person who has a heart attack, but the nurses called in sick so they could go down to do the May Day protest. Could they be overplaying their hand? I think they sensed that they had some sort of a win in Minneapolis. I wouldn't necessarily call it that, but they may think, yeah, we pushed back and we won. Could they be overplaying their hand with this huge effort on May Day, this structure test, because it's going to be like COVID, where parents are once again going to realize that a lot of these teachers and administrators don't actually care about their children or educating kids. They view their job as political, and they're going to want out, or they're going to get really mad at what's happening, and it's going to backfire. Is there a chance of that?
There is a chance. I mean, that's got to be one of those things that people have to be able to see. They have to be able to understand that that's what's happening. Linking the fact that if the schools get closed, or if, some kind of incident, you could even say, like you did, if it could occur, because it's still in the future. But if something does actually happen, when it's no longer in the future, it's present or past tense, that, we're 2nd, 3rd, 5th of May, 10th of May, and we're looking backwards. If something happened, it would be very useful for parents to know which teachers, which nurses, et cetera, who called in sick were not too sick to go to a protest. And it could actually backfire on them pretty badly if a bunch of the people who were too sick to go to work, therefore closing the school, were actually using that as an excuse. And I'm not sure what the I don't know what happens if they call in sick and they weren't sick and they basically just skipped work in a, in a teaching in a school situation. A normal boss would fire you for that if they found out, that you called in sick, but you actually went to, a concert or a protest or whatever else. So it would be very good to know, to have eyes on the ground to see who's at the protest and who's claiming to be sick, and therefore, with a school closed. So it would be possible to make that that fact known and have this backfire on them. It is generally what you have to do. They have their planned operations, and the game is always to either try to foil them by figuring out what they're doing and putting roadblocks, like calling the school, and as you described, or to show after the fact or even during the fact that basically they lied to be able to do the wrong thing. And this, people don't like being lied to. People don't like being manipulated. People don't like seeing their children messed with, really, to turn into political props. The few people who do like that are already activists, and they don't really count. And this is almost always the general strategy that you have to follow. Is they're putting on a theater production, and you have to make them look like they're fools or dishonest actors.
And I would imagine that that'll be the case in this time. That if you live in Florida and you do this, there's a good chance you're going to not have a job. If you live in Illinois, it might be different. But I think that even in Democrat areas, that parents who couldn't go to work, frustrated, their kids. Let's be honest. Look at the reading proficiency scores. I mean that there is so much attention and effort being put on all of this politics in schools, while every year the NAEP scores come out and we've sunk just a little bit lower, or we've flatlined at a very at a rate where 30 to 40% of American school children can even read at grade level. And that's with lowering the standards, like consistently lowering the bar, just so that kids can meet expectations. We don't even have the same bar that we did 20 years ago. And even with that, kids are falling behind. So I think that parents have just had enough, but it's really hard because often parents say, well, this happens in other areas, but not my area. That's other schools, but not my school. And they usually have to see it to believe it, to be honest.
Yeah, those parents should talk to their kids and find out what their kids have seen. Maybe their kids have seen something, maybe they haven't, but people should be talking to their kids anyway. But yeah, this is the model. Obviously, you can expose that this is the plan, the critical pedagogy model that all the schools have adopted. That's the woke education model. Comes from Paulo Freire, as we've talked about before. And Paulo Freire is this Marxist who wrote these books called like The Pedagogy of the Oppressed and The Politics of Education. And he lays out that real literacy is political literacy. Therefore, it doesn't really matter if your son or daughter learns to read from their perspective. All that matters is that they learn how to be political activists. And, that message is showing itself, right? So when parents can connect the dots to, this is what I'm seeing with my kids who are struggling in their academic mastery. Maybe they even have decent grades because the grades are fake or whatever, but they're clearly not reaching academic mastery. We're starting to see these problems, and yet everything's so political all the time. And that this is a deliberate point of the program that runs the schools. You have this opportunity to kind of, let them know and start to get them to be more aware, which causes, if that's the situation, some publicity stunt like this has a much higher chance of backfiring, because all of a sudden, like you said, they might not think it's in their kid's school. And then there it is. They did this thing. I think it should still be like the greatest scandal in the entire world to all people, all parents, at least, with school age children at the very least. There should be this giant scandal that our teachers' unions don't seem to do anything except politics. Anything, ever, never. It's always stuff like this. It's never about actual education. You never hear anything concrete except some kind of program that they're going to install that's going to end up enriching their friends and messing with the kids further. And it's always got a political purpose. And it should actually enrage parents that we have these two major teachers unions in the country that they never do anything except far left politics.
Yes.
That's all they do.
Yeah. Go to NEA.org. They have May Day tool. Just type it in, NEA.org. And all you're going to see is strikes, protests, activism, toolkits, every sort of far left cause under the sun there, and othering.
Education for Sustainable Development. They released an entire curriculum on that a couple of years ago. So now your entire schooling, K through 12, with actual, curriculum laid out in guides that are available on the website from the NEA. The entire thing is organized around the World Economic Forum 17 the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Like, why is the teachers union promoting this weird UN agenda and then reorienting all of education around it? But, this is, again, it's, if people knew what was really going on, especially parents with kids in school, they might actually be shocked. I know that a lot of the moms that are obviously going to watch Moms for Liberty podcast are pretty well aware, but it's still like, it's shocking stuff. It's actually worth, what can a Mom for Liberty who already knows this stuff do? Well, put together a folder, print out some of this stuff, show, the websites or whatever, get the links or whatever, put together a thing. And a physical object is always better. And when you go to lunch with your friends, or you go wherever, say, you're talking, if anything relevant comes up, pull out the binder and say, have you seen this? Can you believe it? Look at this. I actually have this. I have this. It's so shocking. I printed it out. I just want to show people. And show them. I mean, that's what happened with me. I already knew about all those highly sexualized books back in the day, and I went to a kind of early dinner before one of the speaking events that I had some years ago, and one of the moms reaches into her giant oversized mom purse, and could be a suitcase posing as a purse, and pulls out Gender Queer and a couple of the other books, and is like, have you ever seen these? And I'm like, well, I've seen the PDFs. And she's like, no, have you ever seen the real thing? I was like, no. And so she hands me the book, and I already know all about it. I've done podcasts, I've campaigned about this, all over the country. I start flipping through the actual physical book, and it's a jaw dropper just to feel it. I knew what was in it, but to see it in print is different. So, you can put together, you can go down and get a 1/2 inch, 3-ring binder, put together a little 8-page, 10-page, tour of the NEA and the AFT websites, and just say, do you know what our teachers unions are what they actually do with their time? Look at this, and just whip it out whip it out over tiramisu or whatever and coffee at the end of lunch, and just break it down for your friends. It actually works. I mean, it's actually eye-opening.
My 3-ring binders, which I have many, they work so well. I always print off before I go to an event. I make sure that I have several, and people just pour over them. We bring books, and it's what you're saying is, I'm telling you, there are lawmakers that are on our side, and then they see the books, and they are like hair on fire. Like, we've got what I had no idea. It changes them. I can't tell you how many times that actually seeing the materials, watching the videos, also playing some of the videos, like the one that I put on. And if you go to your X account, my X account, Moms for Liberty X account, we have lots of reels, 30, 60, 90 seconds. And they will blow the mind of your friend who's even tepidly on your side. And, share this podcast. If there's someone who, they're in agreement with you, they're in alignment with you, but they're busy, or they're just not as political as you are, say, I challenge you, just listen to this 1-hour podcast, and we'll end soon so that we're not too far over 1 hour, but send them this. And I don't know how many moms have just listened to one of your podcasts, and suddenly they're groupies. They're like, we got to listen to the next one and the next one, because all the things that you're saying, you make sense. The terminology, the way that they talk, the confusing sort of Orwellian speak that they use, that kind of makes your head hurt and makes you feel sad after listening to it, because somewhere it's wrong. you explain it in a way that's easy to understand and also gives a lot of receipts, where the origins of all of this. So you want to give your kind of closing statement and let people know where they can find more of your work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just hold up the little prop again. I mean, I've got it back in its case, but so yeah, if people ask you about May Day or it comes up in conversation, oh yeah, they're doing this May Day stuff, you can be like, yeah, like they, May 1st, like they celebrated in the Nazi regime. They called it Labor Day, and just be subversive and say, like, you saw the coin now, the medallion or medal or whatever. It doesn't have two sides; it's hollow on the backside, so it's not quite a coin. But yeah, the Nazis celebrated May 1st as Labor Day, and same stuff, hammer, sickle, the whole thing on the coin. So you can be a little subversive, I guess, that way. Somebody says, "What do you think of all this May Day stuff? You mean like the Nazis?" And then
That's
what they can,
right, because they claim to be the anti-fascist. They're
So
calling us those names.
So then you can pull out your phone and go to Grok or Chat GPT or whatever and type in, "Did the Nazis celebrate May Day on May 1st or whatever?" And it'll be like, yes. And it'll explain it all to you and people's jaws will drop. But yeah, at any rate, this stuff is it's obviously very timely to talk about May Day here right before the 1st of May, a couple weeks out. But this stuff you're still making a difference. My closing statement is the same thing all the time, everywhere. You're still making a difference. Don't give up. All the little things still matter. I understand that, like, kind of with, there's a war going on, like everybody's attention is kind of shot in every direction right now. And it doesn't feel as unified and cohesive as it did a year and a half, 2 years ago, but that's irrelevant. You're still making a difference. This stuff still matters. This stuff is still happening, and you're still on the front lines fighting it. And it's I mean, this is Moms for Liberty, so you have to say the Esther thing. You were here for such a time as this, so you've got to keep doing it. So don't give up. Don't get frustrated, even with the distraction of all the other stuff going on and everybody losing their minds online. It's fine. Show up, stay firm, stay dedicated, keep looking into what they're doing, keep exposing the Becky Pringle and the other one, Randy Weingarten, for her part of it all, and connect this, to the realities of your kids, your school, and what you're fighting for. So yeah, don't give up.
Yeah. And don't get caught up in a lot of drama with influencers when there are real issues and real things that we have to fight for. Don't get caught up in basically tabloid. It's like
actually, let me say something about that. These influencers. So a lot of people in Moms for Liberty, not everybody, is going to know who Erin Lee is. Erin Lee in Colorado.
Love her.
Yes. And so Erin Lee ran a campaign, just very, very short, to get 3 initiatives to do with sex trafficking, boys being in girls sports under the banner of trans, and of course the medicalization of trans identifying minors, sex denying surgeries, and so on, directly on the Colorado ballot to bypass their communist legislature. When I say communist legislature, I'm not being colorful. There are a lot of actual open communists now on the Colorado legislature. So the legislature was never going to fix this in Colorado. So she did the hard work, did the petitions, got the 500,000 signatures across the 3 things, and ended up getting all 3 of these things on the ballot. But I'm not talking about Erin Lee right now, as great as all that is, and the power of you are making a difference and yada, yada, grassroots for real. I'm talking about the influencers, because she reached out, I reached out in some cases to lots, not just of potential donors who might help this cause come to be, but to influencers to just post a video or a tweet or an Instagram reel or something about it. Not one did. Not
That's horrible.
One. And so these influencers, to heck with them. They're not, you are doing the real work. They are not. Forget their drama. They are getting clicks. They are making themselves famous. They're trying to make money off the top of what all of us are doing. You guys are interesting to them when you're a story they can promote to get clicks and make money off of what you're really doing to make a real difference. And when it comes time to help, they don't. When it comes time to make a difference, they won't. So don't worry about their drama, their tabloids, their fighting. They're actually 95% irrelevant to the cause. And they're mostly just in it for themselves and making their own noise. So you know what? We've been doing it without them actually all along. We just didn't know it. So we can keep doing it without them now.
I'm proud. I had Erin on 3 times, and I'm trying to get her on again to talk about this. She's a little busy right now, but and she's a mom of little kids. But we had her on several times and on live streams, and she's amazing. Same in Washington State. There, the groups in Washington State that fought to put all of these initiatives on a ballot. I mean, if these ladies, if these moms and dads, they can get this kind of initiative on the ballot in Colorado and Washington State, nobody has any excuses, because they were fighting. They talk about David and Goliath. I mean, what Erin was up against, what the moms in Washington State were up against, and what they have overcome is nothing short of a miracle. In California, you know, Sonia Shaw is doing the Lord's work, trying to win state superintendent race, and we've got our friend Kelly Shinesky, who is just I love her so much. She is always fighting, and she is in an area where many people would just give up. And so if these moms don't give up, then neither should anyone who's listening right now. We have no excuse to stop fighting when there are such heroes. And I'm really sad to hear that there were some big name people that would not talk about Erin. And she's such an amazing, I mean, gosh, is she amazing? She's an amazing speaker, so inspiring. Her smile lights up a room. Like she's just, I can't say enough good things about her. And I'm sad to hear that they'd rather talk about really idiotic, dumb things and conspiracies and a bunch of just garbage, especially, you know, I can't get into too much, but I support Erin, and I think that everyone needs to just turn off the influencer wars, tune out, and focus on the things that are going to advance our cause, which is protecting children, saving America, and being joyful warriors. Well, thank you, James, so much for coming on. It's always great to talk to you. I look forward to seeing you in person really soon. And I hope you can come on again and we can talk about some other stuff.
Yeah, well, anytime, let me know.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, bye-bye.
So if the NEA is really just about teachers, why is its president, Becky Pringle, showing up in a conversation about political revolution? If May Day is really just about celebrating workers, why is the message no school, no daycare, no nurses, no work, no businesses, no restaurants? Why are they calling this May Day a structure test? And we talked about that, a structure test, a test to see how far these activists can push and until the system breaks. That doesn't seem to be about teachers, students, workers, or anything other than raw political power. If this is all just spontaneous grassroots action, then why have they been training for it for months? Why, if you just simply Google on YouTube, do a May Day, NEA and Indivisible, any of these organizations, and there are hundreds of them. Why are there so many trainings, so many calls, so many Zooms, so many toolkits? And why are they targeting kids? Why are there the same slogans, the same coalition language, the same tactics, the same toolkits, and the same institutional partners if this is truly grassroots? Nope, it's not grassroots. It's top-down, heavy-handed, far left, Marxist organizing and activism. I'm so appreciative that James Lindsay came on the show to really clarify some of these issues. His expertise is invaluable. One thing that was said by, and I posted this on social media, by one of the activists that spoke at one of the many trainings, that this May Day was going to be, and I quote, the biggest, the brownest, the queerest, and the most radical May Day ever. That doesn't sound like this is about the children. That doesn't sound like this is about fairness. It sounds to me it's about, again, raw political power based on identity and based on this Marxist radical language and critical race theory and gender ideology and all of the critical theories that Dr. James Lindsay discusses at length. If you go to New Discourses on the web, and I'll put some links up. If you follow him on X, again, I'll put all these links up, then you will learn a lot, and I highly suggest that you follow him. So what can you do? What can you do? We talked about this a little bit, and we're going to talk about it some more. I'm not just doing this podcast to be hyperbolic. There is a call to action. And I am calling on parents, if you have got kids in K through 12 schools, that you call your schools. You show up, you send emails too. So you want to call and then send an email because you want the receipts, you want the proof that you did this. Call them and let them know that you expect for schools to be open Friday, May 1st, that you've heard about the push by teachers unions and Democrats and like all of these activist organizations that they want to shut down the schools. Tell them that you expect for school to be open, and that if your child attempts to leave the school premises, that they should, without permission, to stop them. That is not allowed. Do not consent. Do not let your kid leave the campus, and let the school know that you absolutely do not give your permission for your child to leave the school grounds to go and protest in the streets with a bunch of Marxists. So make that clear. And if you find out that the school is kind of compelling this or making your kid feel uncomfortable for not participating, you need to contact Moms for Liberty, and we can help direct you to lawyers, because you should definitely be getting some legal advice if your child is telling you that they feel compelled, that they are feeling pressured. If you are a teacher or an administrator that feels pressured or compelled to call in sick, to go out and protest, if you feel that if you see that there are intimidation tactics being used, please reach out to us, reach out to the Teacher Freedom Alliance, reach out to legal organizations like in Wisconsin. We've got Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and there are lots of national organization, Alliance Defending Freedom, Defending Education. There are lots of organizations. Please reach out, send an email, DM, write a post, and tag all of the above, and let us know what's happening, because sunlight can be the best disinfectant. We want to foil their plot for May 1st. We don't want to see them successful in shutting down American society for a day. We want this structure test to fail. And so the call to action is to recognize what's happening, what activists are attempting to do, and to do what you can to make sure that your child is protected and that your community is not held hostage by these activist educators, activist unions, and just plain old radical far-left Marxist activists. So thank you for listening. I hope that you have a lot of information and insight, and please stay tuned to the Moms for Liberty social media pages, as well as mine at Scarlet #4 Kids, because I am going to be posting a lot of the receipts. I know that many times I've said, well, one of the teachers said this or that. I have all the receipts. I didn't want to play all of that through this interview because then this would have been a 3-hour podcast, but I am going to post everything. A lot of it already has been posted. I'll share it again. I want you to have this content. I want you to have these receipts. I want you to do what James said and create a file, create a little Google Doc that you can share, print out a few things so that you can show people. I think it's hard for them to believe that this is happening, but they'll believe it soon enough come Friday, May 1st, when they see the fruit of these activists' labor. So let's do our best to kind of thwart their kind of diabolical plan. And where we can't, make sure that you are watching. And if you see a teacher that called in sick out on the streets protesting, make sure that you screenshot or you take out your phone and you grab a picture, and let's expose these radicals. Let's expose them, and let's make sure that, let's try very hard to make sure they don't have a job. Because if you are going to sacrifice your students, their education, and their well-being on the altar of this insane political cause, then you really should. Teaching children is not your calling. You should just keep pursuing political activism. Our kids should not be forced to suffer your activism in classrooms. That's not fair, that's not right, and that's not teaching. So to all the good teachers and administrators out there, stay strong. I don't care if you don't agree with me politically. We left, right, doesn't matter. This is above all of that. This is about using classrooms as these political incubators. And it's not fair, nor is it right or just to use your position of power and privilege, as many of the activists like to say, in the classroom to force your ideas on children who do not have the mental capacity to resist them. That is indoctrination, that is propaganda. And isn't that everything that many more progressive educators stand against? So don't turn into that which you despise. Like, be a good person and don't indoctrinate other people's kids. And don't stand for it when you see it happening. You've got rights, and so do kids, and definitely parents. And we're going to stand up and fight for our parental rights. And we're not going anywhere. So thanks for tuning in. Bye.